Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Diehl. I'll be moderating today's discussion. I do serve on the Interreligious Council of Linn County as the Vice President. On this morning's show, we'll be talking about should critical race theory be taught in public schools. So here to help us navigate this pretty polarizing topic, I have two guests with us. And welcome. And so I'd like for Dean Wing for you to start us off. Just introduce yourself, a little bit of your background, and why this particular topic is important to you.
Yes, my name is Adrien Wing. I am on the faculty of the University of Iowa College of Law, where I have taught for 35 years. I'm an associate dean there. And my specialties include race and gender discrimination. I have been involved with critical race theory basically since it started in the late 1980s.
Thank you.
So my name is Stacey Walker. I serve on the Linn County Board of Supervisors as the chair of the Linn County Board of Supervisors. And I consider myself a community organizer. And I have worked in race-based politics for a number of years, striving for equity and for all people in policies here in Linn County and around the country.
Well, again, thank you both for joining us this morning. So, critical race theory, unless you've been living under a rock, again, has probably been in the it's been one of the most polarizing topics that probably in the last few months or longer. I would say it really came into public consciousness a year ago, I would say, shortly after the murder of George Floyd. If you would have asked me spring of 2020, what is critical race theory? You probably would have gotten a deer in the headlight response, right? Something along the lines of, well, it sounds like an important theory that has something to do with race, right? Beyond that, I think I would have been at a loss or just making things up. Since then, I think a lot of people have become a little bit more educated about what it is, but I still think there's a significant gap there in our understanding. And we're talking this morning specifically about should it be taught in public schools. And for those that are aware that in Iowa, as of July 1st, it's effectively been illegal to teach critical race theory. So to kind of get us up to speed and to give us a little background of what critical race theory is, I'd hope, Dean Wing, could you just give us a little bit of the history, a working definition, and kind of where we find ourselves today?
Yes. The subject critical race theory was, as you said, not very well known at all by the public until fairly recently. It started in the 1970s when a few people, mainly men of color, became law professors. And they decided in their work to focus on race issues. It then really blossomed in the 1990s, and a number of books came out under the title Critical Race Theory. And all of the people involved at that point were in law. And since that time, other disciplines started to be interested. So there are people now in education and history and political science and some other areas. But all of these people, all of these scholars are in the college or graduate school level. So for instance, we teach critical race theory in law school to people who've already finished a bachelor's degree. It is not at all under its title and under what it actually is about, something that is aimed for anybody under the college level, if not the graduate school level. And that's because it's a very complicated and sophisticated understanding of grappling with race and racism, mainly in the United States, but also there are now some scholars in other countries who have looked at it. So most people still, even though the term is being bandied about, have no actual understanding of what it's really saying. And part of that is it's hard to know because the materials that have been written were not written for the general public. They were written for people in graduate school or maybe in some undergraduate liberal arts departments.
I'd have to agree with Dean Wing there. It's, I said in a pre-show meeting, I'd be surprised to learn that anybody at the elementary, middle, or high school level could provide us with a working definition of critical race theory. And quite honestly, the debate is focused on whether or not it should be taught in public schools here, which is quite interesting to me because it's not being taught here. But I do think we ought to have a conversation about its value and bringing it out of the academy. As Dean Wing has mentioned, it's largely something taught to graduate level students in law school and political science and so on and so forth. I think we ought to be talking about how we bring these tenets out of the academy and into public discourse, because clearly there is a misunderstanding in the general public consciousness about what exactly critical race theory is.
Yeah, and I would say generally that's true for a lot of theories, right? Sophisticated theories, law theories, scientific theories, right? There's a lot of misunderstanding, and so therefore, it can create a lot of confusion. So I want to kind of level set, but I do want to get back to what you're saying here. But I want to give the audience just a kind of a working definition of what I kind of found is a good definition of critical race theory. And to your point, Dean Wing, I did take it upon myself to just start reading a little bit of this, but yeah, it's pretty heavy. I was mentioning in the pre-show, may want to get a law degree before I go there. But a definition here that I found was critical race theory, or also referred to as CRT, focuses on the concept of race as a social construct, the ties between social inequality and race, and the idea that existing systems and power structures, such as government and laws, have been built to resist change, including changes meant to fight racism. Obviously, to your point, it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, find me a third grader that can recite that definition.
That's right. Or yeah, just even understand what it's trying to say. So if I hear you, Stacey and Dean Wing, what you're saying is it might be, and don't, if I'm misinterpreting your words, it might be appropriate not to teach it in our public schools or our K through 12 schools, but not for the reasons that maybe have been brought up.
I'm not saying that. So I want to be clear. I am not saying it would be inappropriate to be taught in public schools. I'm saying I don't think it is being taught in public schools. And if it's going to be taught in public schools at an elementary level, and I mean by elementary, a foundational level, we have to bring those theoretical concepts out of the academy, and a curriculum would need to be developed for an age-appropriate curriculum would need to be developed, is what I'm saying. I'm saying, we have these laws, and Iowa wasn't the only state to try to ban critical race theory from being taught in their public schools. I am saying I don't believe it's being taught in our public schools. Maybe at our region, certainly at our regents' universities, if they qualify as public schools, they receive, taxpayer dollars, but it's not being taught K through 12. At least it's not being taught here in Iowa. I don't have a problem with the introduction of theories of critical race theory. In fact, I think it would behoove us to have a better understanding of critical race theory. I'm saying I don't think it's being taught right now.
Okay, we have to distinguish between something called critical race theory and anything that discusses race. Right. So what's happened in the media and since last year, when then President Trump, had an executive order that he was trying to ban critical race theory in the federal government, etc., is that the term critical race theory is being used for any focus on race at all. And so I agree with Stacey that there are certainly discussions one can have in elementary school that has to do with color or the history of our country. Certainly kids in elementary school, they learn about slavery. We just got a national holiday, right? That has to do, Juneteenth, that has to do with freeing slaves. So little children will be celebrating Juneteenth, and you have to explain to them, well, what is Juneteenth? So discussions of race clearly are taught and have been taught on all levels. And they say kids as young as 5 can begin to identify that people are being looked at differently based on how they look. But the jurisprudence of critical race theory is something separate. But on the other hand, it's like, well, it almost doesn't matter because they're just using the term for anything about race. So then we should have a discussion about how is race, involved in American society, and how should young people learn about that, because they're going to pick it up. Even if you weren't teaching them, they definitely pick it up. I was 5 years old when I learned I was something called a Negro, right? Back then they called Black people Negroes, and we weren't allowed to go into an amusement park in Indianapolis because the park didn't let in Negroes. And whatever that was, apparently I was that. And so a whole group of people I was with could not go into the park. And I was 5, and I'm 65 now. And I will never forget that first experience with being othered, and whatever the other was that I was something negative. Right.
I think that the Dean brings up a great point, is that at least as of late, critical race theory has been used as an umbrella term by, I would say, certain political elements to mean or to refer to anything that discusses race, and thus distorts what it actually is. And you've got people in the academy, going crazy and saying, hey, wait a second, it's okay to learn about X, Y, and Z things in school, but let's not call that critical race theory, because as we've discussed already, it's a complicated, complex theory that largely is discussed at the college level. And in fact, one of the scholars that has been involved in the modern scholarship of critical race theory, Ian Haney Lopez, has written extensively about what he calls dog whistle politics. And I would argue that critical race theory has become a dog whistle to refer to what I think what its critics would call reverse racism, which is something that doesn't exist. But it's a dog whistle, just like the phrase law and order was a dog whistle in the 50s and 60s and continues to be a dog whistle, just like the idea of what a real American is a dog whistle, or what urban crime refers to in politics. Critical race theory has become that, and it's terribly unfortunate, because I think if ever there is a time for folks to really dive deep into critical race theory, it's now.
Mm-hmm. So excellent, great points. So I think what's interesting is just kind of getting to the root of how people perceive it, how they understand it, right? And one of those ways for me was looking at the actual bill that passed on July 1st, House File 802. Again, that went into effect here in Iowa, that effectively prohibited the teaching of critical race theory in all Iowa governmental agencies, entities, school districts, public post-secondary institutions. And there's essentially 9 things that they called out that they, apparently associated with critical race theory. So I'm not going to go through all 9 for the sake of time, but I thought I'd lift maybe 1 or 2 and just get your response as we kind of get into that and how you think it is tied to critical race theory or not. So The first one is, and this is exactly how it is listed in the bill, anybody can go look it up, that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex, that the United States of America and the state of Iowa are fundamentally or systemically racist or sexist, and number three, that an individual solely because of the individual's race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. So whether it's reactionary or politicized, which it's obvious, you know, that there's certainly an element, if not the entire element here. Can you respond to just those first 3 out of 9, whether you agree that that is, in some sense, the tenet of critical race theory, and if not, why?
Dean, would you like to respond first?
Yeah, number one, what's interesting about that law is it doesn't even mention critical race theory, right?
Right. Yep, that's right.
You can read it and reread it and read it and reread it, and you're like, well, where's the critical race theory? And so it's not actually banning critical race theory, but it's, like you say, it's listing some things. And so one of them, you said the first one is about whether or not certain people are superior.
Yeah,
right?
Quote, that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race
right.
or sex.
And critical race theory is the opposite of that. It's saying whatever our backgrounds are, our race, our ethnicity, our gender, our sexual orientation, or whatever identities we have, that no one is superior to anyone else, that we are all equal in the United States of America. At least we're supposed to be, right? On paper, we're supposed to be. Now, what critical race theory does is look at history, and that history is such that certain people have not been treated equally to other people, right? So, as we know, we the people from the beginning did not include all the people. So they weren't talking about women, they weren't talking about white men without property, they weren't talking about blacks, they weren't talking about Indians. And so the history is that people were not being treated equally under the law at the time. And then now, even though certain laws don't exist anymore, they're what we call de facto differences, not by law, but the reality is there are groups of people who are being treated worse or better than other people. So that first line they have is actually not at all getting to what I just said.
Right.
And I'll stop with that one.
Right. And I would argue that critical race theory would maintain that the law has been used throughout history to suppress certain groups and even suppress certain groups' abilities to challenge laws that are unfair and disproportionately impact. And so what you have now is a law that seeks to ban critical race theory, although, as Dean Ween mentioned, that law doesn't even mention it, and it couldn't be further from getting at what critical race theory is. But nonetheless, it is an attempt to prevent the discourse that would take into account things like the legacy of slavery or segregation or Jim Crow, and how all of our history, which is American history, how all of our history and its remnants have impacted certain groups of people. Now, critical race theory has been extended, at least in scholarship, at the scholarship level, to talk about these types of discriminations and oppressive systems for any number of groups of people, which is a good thing. But again, the overall point is the fact that an institution, and in this case, government, is trying to limit people's ability to even study this stuff is what critical race theory would say is part of the problem, is that we have institutions doing whatever they can to preserve the status quo and prevent the other and oppressed groups from seeking equity.
Yeah, and so it's, as you think through this, there is just this perception that, there's a fear that if you teach this, whatever it ends up being, right, because of its complexity, its polarization, its confusion, that it will lead to kind of unforeseen outcomes, right? That's this kind of stuff you see. So, well, CRT or critical race theory is, teaching kids that, that America is evil, and that the white race is evil, and things of that nature, and it, that's the end game here. And what I hear is the exact opposite of that. So how did we arrive? I just lifted a couple examples that you can just turn on the news or open up your smartphone and you can see people saying, how did we arrive at that point? Well, and either one of you can take that, but how did we get where we're at, and how do we help resolve some of those misunderstandings?
I'll start off. You mentioned we had the George Floyd incident last summer. And out of that incident, which of course was not the first incident of a Black person being killed by a white police officer, out of that incident, though, there were a lot of demonstrations, there were corporations, there were universities, there were religious leaders, there were so many people of all backgrounds who were saying, we have to end this racism. We have to move forward. And so it was unique at that particular historical moment that a lot of society was focusing on long-term racism in the criminal justice system and other systems. And so right after that is when you have former President Trump coming up with the executive order. In other words, to kind of derail a focus by a lot of society on ending racism and instead trying to ban talking about racism in the area that he controlled, which is the federal government, right? So it has to be seen, the connections there between Floyd and other people who were killed around that time period, and all of a sudden this word critical race theory popping up literally like out of the blue for most of the American public.
To react to your question, I come from a world of electoral politics. And for me, this is an old tactic, and it's best described by the Southern strategy, which was employed by President Nixon's campaign, which was to otherize a group of people and get the majority, which in America is still white Americans, to feel as if their values are under attack or that they are being demonized. I mean, Alan, you said it yourself. It's in reciting the perception that America is inherently racist. Well, it is. I mean, America was literally built on the backs of people it treated as chattel slaves, and those folks were Black people. And we had laws that codified Black people as second-class citizens. Learning about that and its remnants is something that is incredibly important. But as the other gains political power, it is a wildly effective political strategy to convince the majority that the other is, if they are to gain power, that the views that the majority hold will be somehow under attack. And that's why I think the phrase has been misconstrued to be a blanket term for all of these things that actually doesn't mean, but for all of these things are intended to literally scare a group of people into voting for a particular candidate or supporting a particular party that promulgates the myth that critical race theory is about, teaching people that white folks are evil or that Black people are superior or whatever, or what have you.
Yeah, it gets to this argument around, can you teach history in a varied and diverse way, right? Like, there doesn't have to be one particular narrative, right? When you're talking about history, like there's a lot of stories that you can tell about our history. Some are good, some are bad, depending on your perspective. If you're part of a marginalized group, it may have certainly been bad. but that by talking about each one of these narratives, right, and the impact that they had on these groups, I think it promotes a healthier discussion when you can simultaneously criticize and also compliment your country. I think seems to be the healthy place to be, right? But it seems like it's a zero-sum game at this time. So could you talk about how we can, and we have to some degree, but how can we calm the conversation and get it back to what it is, which is the freedom to both love and, dare I say, hate your country at times?
Yeah, I don't know that we will be able to calm it, because the people who are fomenting this mix-up or this wrong-headed focus on critical race theory want it to be inflamed. They want people to be scared. They want people to be afraid of the other. Particularly as we head toward, I think it's 2040 or around that time, when there was just some data that came out that said white people will not be the majority of the country then. They're already not the majority in certain states. And I guess by that time, it'll be the what happens nationally. And so that is very, very scary if you've been part of a majority and take for granted that you are the majority and that you are in control politically and economically and every other way, to think of some future where that would not be the case, a future that could be in your lifetime and certainly that of your children. But one thing we teach in law school is lawyers have to be able to argue both sides. You know, one year they may be a prosecutor, another year they may be a public defender. And so also as teachers, we have to teach in a way to present a variety of views to our students so that they can engage in debate and dialogue and question. And if you make illegal whole arguments of discussion, that's not healthy, that's not appropriate, that helps lead to ignorance. And as we've seen, ignorance in the current era is resulting in some people who are engaging in practices that some of them are getting COVID or other things. And so ignorance can actually be deadly to you, and certainly not productive for the future of our country that we want to see in the rest of this century.
Excellent. And we just have probably about a minute and a half. Stacey, I'd like you to kind of take us home here with some closing thoughts, if you will.
Yeah, well, if we are going to get to a better place, it takes responsible public leaders, and it takes courageous public leaders in this climate where, stepping out and saying something bold that, like critical race theory, isn't a bad thing, and we should teach the true history of our country, is a good thing. It shouldn't be a courageous act, but it is. And the only way we are going to get better and heal as a country is if we address the things that have initially torn us apart and address the ugly parts of our history. And that's what makes this country truly great, is the ability to criticize our country without being dragged and shot in the street for leveling a criticism, particularly one that's based in the truth, at our country. But even more so than that, where we go from here is understanding the criticisms, understanding the challenges, but moving to the opportunities we have to make this country better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been a fantastic and very fast conversation. 30 minutes has flown by, but I appreciate both of your perspectives, your intellect here, your experiences, and it's been phenomenal. So again, thank you very much, and I hope our listeners and viewers enjoyed it as well, and hope you have a great rest of your Sunday. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.